Welcome, friends, it's the Movie Film Podcast. Movie Film Podcast, enjoy the show. Zachy and Brian are talking about movies. Movie Film Podcast on the radio.
You and me, Max. We're gonna give them back their heroes.
In the not-too-distant future, Max is a main force officer trying to protect his family. His only weapon, 600 horses of fuel-injected venture. Mad Max, the maximum force of the future.
Welcome to a movie film commentary track. My name is Zachy Hassan. I'm here with Brian Hall.
Witness me, Zachy.
Oh, I'm about to.
How's it going?
It's going. I was gonna say, are you feeling mad?
I'm getting miffed. I'm working up to mad. I hope by the end to be furious.
This is we're gonna watch Mad Max for this commentary track, and that was my thought revisiting this film. This is the first film from 1979. I was like, the title feels like a misnomer because he really is perturbed Max more than anything.
Well, this is the journey to mad.
Yeah.
Right? Which I'd kind of forgotten. And I guess we can get into it, but the construction of this story or the structure of it, you can see another version where this whole thing is like, it reminded me of The Crow, weirdly, as I was watching it. But it's like if The Crow was the third act.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? Which is kind of interesting.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Certainly, a colorful cast of ne'er-do-wells who you want to see get their uppance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's plenty of them. You know, this series has been one of my favorites for a long time. So, given that this year marks not just the release of Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, but it also is the 45th anniversary of the release of this film, I was like, well, it seems like the stars are aligning here for us to begin what I hope will be an extended journey through the saga of one Max Rockatansky.
Yeah, I love that name. You're the one, by the way, who got me into these movies because many, many years ago, I had not seen one of them. And so you bought me the Blu-ray collection. And the only reason I've seen these movies is because of you. So I can't wait to talk about this with you.
See, and that was before Fury Road came out.
Yeah. You were already a fan of the series and made sure that I became familiar with it too.
Well, I'm super excited to have this conversation. So I'm queued up on my end. I know you are, but in case people want to watch along with us, why don't we give them a second to do that while the sponsors do their thing, and then we'll be back right after this. Okay, we're back, and like I said, we're going to watch Mad Max from 1979. Quite a career opener for George Miller and Mel Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
Not a bad starting line. There's some other car related hitting the gas. I don't know. Anyway, it's good. That's my point. So we're gonna hit play on 3. You ready?
Ready.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3, play.
All right.
So yeah, the rights thing for these films is a little interesting because the first one is owned by MGM.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it's an Amazon joint. But all the other ones are from Warner Brothers.
Interesting. I was going to say, seeing the MGM lion, I'm still a little jarred when I see the new CG lion.
It's to ensure that no lions were harmed in the making of that logo.
Yeah. First things first, I just have to say, I really enjoyed rewatching this movie. I remembered liking it when you had introduced it to me, but I don't know. There's something... It's so scrappy.
Yeah.
But still so visually like potent and dynamic. And it's just like, wow, this is someone who is using every cent they have to do the best to communicate what's inside their minds. And you're like, this person is bursting with talent. Yeah. And any sort of scrappiness to it is just admirable. You know what I mean? Like what
yeah,
they're able to
absolutely.
do with what they have. And this thing is just bursting at the seams with, enthusiasm and vision. And something about the scrappiness makes me love it even more.
Yeah, well, it just right up top where it says a few years from now. I kind of love how this sort of accidentally backed into being a post-apocalyptic story.
Right. I mean, do you want to get into that a little bit? I found that fascinating. Why that was.
Well, primarily, I mean, they're doing this guerrilla style. This is what George Miller said, and we'll get into his journey into even making this thing. But it's like there's no, they don't have money for extras and things like that. So let's just say it's set in the near future.
Yeah.
And we buy it, I mean, that's sort of the extraordinary thing. I mean, they had $350,000 to make this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's George Miller, who at the time was an ER doc.
Which is kind of fascinating when you think about it, right? Considering the violence, the type of violence in this movie. It feels like a lot of things that he may have even witnessed.
I'm sure. Yeah.
On the job, just type from car accidents and things like that.
Well, and that's really it. I mean, he had an idea of making a movie situated around car crashes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's extraordinary to think that this ended up becoming one of the most important mythologies in science fiction history.
Right.
It set a template that inspired just a raft of imitators.
Right.
And it's just something where it's an ER doc who saw a whole bunch of car accidents. It was like, hey, how about a movie about people driving crazy?
Right.
It's remarkable,
But what I find fascinating about that is him having to throw in that title card about being in the near future to explain why they don't have a lot of extras, why the sets don't look this way or that. It's interesting then that the next movie more resembles what we know about Mad Max, or what we recognize about Mad Max, with a little bit more of that sort of Looney Tunes, crazy, scary, maniacal society.
That's right.
Right. So it makes me wonder if then when he had more, like, this sparked an idea in his mind, or did he always intend for it to have a little bit of lunacy to it? Do you know what I mean?
I think in terms of lunacy, you say that right as we're on the Knight Rider here.
Yes.
And it's so appropriate, right? Because the Knight Rider is sort of, you can draw a straight line between him and the war boys from Fury Road,
which I found fascinating because this movie doesn't have a ton of that sort of give me's the guzzling sort of vernacular. Yeah. But at the same time, the Knight Rider kind of does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's definitely like a lunacy to it, but he even saying that he wants to be recognized for this, like, witness me, toe cutter, for what I'm doing. That sort of weird cultish aspect of this universe is totally present in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, had there been nothing else after this, I think this would be acknowledged as, like you said, a kind of a scrappy little film, and it would be something you show in film schools, maybe, I think the fact that it is, the inciting incident that led to this franchise just makes it more fascinating, because you see the progression of George Miller's sort of mad genius.
Right.
And he is a filmmaker who I have had just a ton of respect for a long time. I remember when I was going to film school, I was like, Richard Donner and George Miller were like the directors. I would be like, these are the guys, man.
Right.
And obviously Mel Gibson is sort of like the Venn diagram right in the middle there,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but, it just makes me wonder if, I mean, obviously he is going for something slightly heightened here. Again, I mean, just going straight with Knight Rider here in the way that he speaks. But then I almost wonder if then that inspired, when he did have more money, like, yeah, but what if they wore like hockey masks, and what if their cars were a little more tricked out in sort of a violent looking way? And it just allowed him then to sort of lean into something that he was, even his own brain was just sort of teasing at in this iteration.
Yeah, it's fun. One thing I've heard people say is that each movie is sort of a remake of the previous one. And would push back on that with regards to this one. I think this one stands out by virtue of the fact that the other ones are not like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people say, "Oh, do you need to watch this one to watch the others?" And I'm like, not really. I mean, me personally, the first Mad Max film I ever saw was Beyond Thunderdome.
Oh, interesting. That
Yeah,
kind
I
of makes
saw
sense
that.
with our age.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that in '87. I saw it on cable television. I was visiting Edmonton at the time, and then about maybe 6 years later, I watched the other ones.
Right.
But I think it's very much you see the progression in Miller's thinking, where this is a pretty straightforward revenge story.
Right.
It works on that level. What we see with the next one, and certainly with the third one, is Max being elevated to sort of a mythical, man with no name type hero.
Right.
And I think what's remarkable is that it doesn't seem like a contradiction. It feels like a natural progression.
Right. Right. Whereas, because I had only seen this movie once.
Yeah.
And when I think of Mad Max now, of course, I think of, leather outfits and, Tina Turner and how she's dressed and everything.
Right.
And so it's kind of interesting seeing this movie where people look like they're from 1979.
That's right.
Right. And meaning like bell bottoms and such. But, yeah, or even, I'm sorry, when you were talking about him becoming this mythic man with no name figure, I mean, in this movie, you see him wearing khakis and like a blue button-up shirt.
Yep. That's right. Yeah.
But I love it because there still is that spark of crazy creativity here. Like, this is a different universe.
Yes, and that's, I was just going to mention that. I mean, look at the manic energy with which these car crashes are executed.
Oh man, they look so dangerous.
And they are, right?
Yes.
I mean, they were doing this like there was a kid running in the street, and that's not done on a blue screen,
I know. Yeah. I mean, obviously
right,
it's good we don't still do this.
Yeah, I mean, you just never have the like that part. I don't even know how they did that, and it's one of those I don't want to know.
I hope it's a dummy. It kind of reminds me. I was watching Used Cars because I was trying to go through all of Zemeckis.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Oh, dude, that looks so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Going to that camper, the car.
Yep.
And there's a scene where a guy is sort of stumbling through the streets, not paying attention, and a car goes speeding toward him, right up to him, and then cuts to not hit him. And I was listening to the commentary, and Zemeckis and Bob Gale are like, what were we thinking? I can't look. Like, it was a different time. And they were like, if they're to be believed, they're like not looking at the screen because it's like we almost killed that guy.
Yeah.
And so it's good. It's good that we don't do that sort of thing anymore. But there is something so awesome about seeing an actual car flying through the air and tumbling and blasting through things.
Yeah, and certainly in this film, there's a lot of stunts that made it, like injuries made it onto the screen.
Sure.
And most of these people were paid with beer and steak or whatever, like
Rue meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard this I Am a Rocker and I'm a Suicide Machine and all that apparently is like lyrics from AC/DC songs.
Okay, that makes
some
sense.
of it. But I love it. I love the just unhinged nature of these bad guys. That's what makes them feel so dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Like you just don't, even when you're having a face-to-face conversation, you have no idea what they will do next.
Yeah, Hugh Keys-Byrne, who plays Toe Cutter, and of course he was Immortan Joe in Fury Road. There's something so sinister about the fact that he doesn't speak in an elevated voice. He has this kind of eerie calm.
Yes, yeah, almost in a hushed tones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've disappointed me again, kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, dude, all of these introductory shots of Max are so badass,
right?
It should be studied. That the one we passed over it a little bit, but when he gets in his car and shuts the door, and then it sort of goes over to the rearview mirror, and you just see the bottom half of his mouth. I'm like, whoa, yeah, almost like a Batman shot.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, because it's like even at this stage, Miller had a sense of like who he expected this character to become. You know,
Yeah, sure.
obviously with no. I mean, nobody sets out to make the most profitable film ever made.
Yeah.
That ended up happening with this, but what's remarkable is when you look at especially the original trilogy, right? So you have Mad Max in 79, you have Road Warrior in 82, and then Beyond Thunderdome in 85. And you have this one here, which again is just tossed together. We're grabbing whatever shots we can. And then by movie 3, you've got, the opening credits and a Tina Turner song playing.
Right.
And I'm like, isn't that remarkable? Like, what a progression.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing.
I mean, this movie launched Mel Gibson through the stratosphere.
Yes, which is hard for me to have perspective on because I've just always known him as Mel Gibson.
Right.
But yeah, watching this, you're like, no, he's very charismatic. He's handsome.
Look at
Like
look at that kid right there.
Yeah.
just a 23 years old here, Brian.
23. I saw that. Incredible.
Yeah, little does he know all the racial slurs that are going to emanate from his lips, and
it's still heartbreaking. I mean, it's heartbreaking that a human would be like that, period. But it's like when someone you've loved,
somebody you admire,
and in movies that you've watched your whole life, it's hard.
By the way, this cracks me up.
Yes,
where you hear it's like a Naked Gun thing, like you have the saxophone music on, you hear it, and it doesn't even occur to you like, oh, it's this woman playing the sax.
It almost feels like something out of Airplane.
Yes, exactly.
It sounds like it's part of the soundtrack, and then you do this hard cut to this woman playing the saxophone in the same room as the guy. And the problem is, I assume it's a sort of romancy kind of vibe going on, but there's just no romantic or seductive way to play the saxophone. It's just a big clumsy instrument, and I was like, she may as well have been playing a xylophone. Like it's just it's just so awkward. And it doesn't that feel like of its era too. I found this fascinating. I watched what's that movie? St. Elmo's Fire, I think, for the first time, and Rob Lowe is this hotshot saxophonist, and the movie ends with his friends seeing him go on a bus leaving Chicago for LA, like, well, I hope I hit it big, and he has a saxophone on his back. I'm like, what was that really like something people believed in the 80s with the saxophone? I don't know.
I guess so.
Yeah.
So this house right here, the Rockatansky house, apparently it's still standing in Melbourne.
Wow.
And it's like a place that gets rented out and stuff, and it's still there. It's kind of a tourist attraction. If you ever make your way to the Down Under, Brian, you can hit up the Rockatansky household.
I'd love to. Wow, that's so interesting. I mean, because it looks, I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't want to insult the house, but it just doesn't look super sturdy from the exterior.
Right.
I don't know. But hey, who am I to say? I'd love to have a house like that in this market.
See, I think by the way, I'm wearing like that exact shirt that Max has on right now. I just realized it's like a baby blue, tight t-shirt. I think he fills it out probably better than me, but, the whole sort of suburban normalcy is also sort of what sets this one apart,
Yes.
I said earlier, like he's more like kind of dismayed Max more than anything.
Yeah, this is how he becomes Mad Max. I mean, I was thinking ahead then to who he becomes in the sequels, and it's like, well, yeah. I mean, if this was how his life started,
yeah.
And then I love this. By the way, I was reading about this sign language that she does here. Mm-hmm. She's literally just making this up.
Really?
Yeah, like this isn't based on any sort of Australian sign language. Which, by the way, isn't that like a funny phenomenon lately these days where you find out that these people who are doing sign language for mayors and things like that on these broadcasts on the news.
Oh, yeah. They're just
making it up.
It's like a Howard Stern bit.
My stomach, I couldn't take it being up there knowing I was faking it, and someone knows.
Yeah,
someone knows.
You expect them to be like Baba Booey,
Yeah, and then run away
as they would run off. Yeah. What fascinates me about this film is its depiction of society that is clearly crumbling but isn't there yet. So it's kind of like people hanging on to something that probably needs to be let go of.
I love that. Yeah, you're
Right?
so right. Yeah.
You and I were having this conversation recently where I was like, are we in the Mad Max 1 part of like everything and we just don't realize it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? I think about that a lot because that's the thing about this movie, right? Like if you're Max and you've got your wife and you're living this normalcy,
Yes. Yes.
without necessarily acknowledging or even being aware of how shit's falling apart, man.
I would say I used to be one of those people. When I would always say I want to see 100 years into the future, and a lot of people would say, "Do you think there'll be 100 years into the future?" And I was like, "Guys, all right, come on." I would say, yeah. In recent years, for the first time in my life, I think, well, all empires fall. Like
Right, right.
I don't know what lies ahead. There's a lot of cracks that need attention, and I just hope that we give them the attention they need, so things can we can still have the life that Max has at the beginning of this film. For
Well, as we record this, we got a situation where half the country is like, "Hey, let's reelect Immortan Joe," and by that I mean not the president named Joe.
I know. I mean, things as major as that, all the way down to the fact that Taco Bell now costs like $20 to get a meal. It's like, you know what I mean? Like it's just all these things and inflation and like I was talking about housing earlier. It's just. It's just at what point does the cracks become too big and we fall through them,
Yeah, and I think that's what sort of what prompted much of the storyline here. George Miller talked about how this was made during the petroleum shortage and during the tail end of Jimmy Carter's presidency and how that was impacting life even in Australia. And he talked about how you had gas shortages. And so people were lining up to get gas and whatnot. And 10 days into this thing, somebody shoots a gun into the air.
Oh, wow.
Because, and he talked about, he's like, Australia is not a gun culture, but, somebody jumped the line and somebody got pissed off and shot a gun into the air. And George Miller had this thought. It was like, this is how we are after 10 days.
Right.
Now, where are we after 100 days or several years, And this is, it is a truism of just sort of human nature is, we don't answer to scarcity well. We tend to dig in and become, more provincial, and so there is sort of an Australian cultural element to this, but it's showing something just sort of basic about human nature. And I think that's why this film, I think all of the films, that's why they've transcended, because they speak to something basic that we understand. And you hear me say this all the time. The best movies are the "What would you do" movies. Well, I think you look at this whole situation, and you're like, well, who am I in this?
Yep. Who am I? Exactly. And so, how would I try to exist with all this escalating around me?
Exactly.
Like this couple here, I probably would have left a lot earlier than they did, but
that's always my thought whenever I watch this movie. I'm like, as soon as them bikers show up, why aren't you hauling ass out of there? Right? Because what happens to them is probably the most horrific thing in this whole movie.
Yeah.
The way it's depicted, and we'll get there. It's like a horror movie.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because this movie is rated R. I think it earns it, but it's not as intense in some ways on the surface as a lot of R-rated movies are these days. But it's a lot of sort of menace and sort of uncomfortable implication, right? And so it's interesting that I guess this movie was banned in several countries when it first came out.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, including New Zealand, I guess, because of, spoiler, but when Goose is burned alive in his car, apparently something like that had happened in real life in New Zealand. And so they're
okay.
Nah. And they didn't want the movie coming out there. And then it was banned for a long time in Sweden. It's interesting, countries taking a stand on a movie. I can't remember the last time I heard about something like that in recent times.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that it's remarkable to be like this, despite the fact that it's banned in a few markets, despite the fact that it tanked in the US. because they screwed it up and they tried to they dubbed over all the Australian accents with American accents. Despite all that, it became again the most profitable movie ever made.
Isn't that incredible? Yeah, I guess it grossed 100 million worldwide
In 1979.
Yeah, jinx. Yeah, which is about with inflation about 405 million today.
Yeah,
This
against
movie,
a $350,000 budget. It's amazing.
incredible. It held the record, for most profitable independent
For
film
20
of all
years
time.
until Blair Witch.
Till Blair Witch.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So not a bad run. And I think that success again. I think obviously you can look at the various the roadway sequences and stuff and acknowledge that they're well done, but you don't get success like that just because of that, right? You get that kind of success because there's a visceral experience that's been created that people want to experience again and again.
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about that when I saw those numbers. I thought, how did this become such a tremendous success?
Yeah.
And then it kind of occurred to me. I was thinking of that during the movie, and then it occurred to me in the third act where I was like, this is a comic book movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, this is in the 70s where you have these really gritty, realistic, types of films where the heroes always fail. There's that great Family Guy joke where, this guy figures out the thing he needs to figure out, and then he triumphantly walks out of like a library or something and gets shot to death. And then, I don't remember who it is, but one of the characters is like, oh, right, it's a 70s movie. And it's like, no, this is like a kind of a revenge thing, and it feels like a comic book movie. And so it feels like the movies that were coming out in the 80s. It was like almost ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
In that sort of way, like a
Absolutely.
punk rock Western. And so I can see why this was really appealing. It's very different. And it probably appealed to that pulpy comic book thing that people liked, but weren't seeing anywhere.
Yeah. But even still, I think what's so interesting is that all of the other films, the Mad Max films, and neither of us has seen Furiosa as of this recording. We should just as a stick pin in time. But the Mad Max films, they depict just a hellscape of a society, but they exist as within the context of an ultimately hopeful story.
Yeah, sure.
All of them. And this is the only one where it ends with our hero exacting some measure of vengeance. But the ending isn't meant to make you feel good about it.
Yes, because he says that's why he wants to leave the police force, is if I spend more time out here, I'll become like them.
That's right.
And then he does.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's funny going back to the comic booky thing. I mean, even to the title, Mad Max.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever it shows that Halls of Justice thing, the score is like dun 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 dun, kind of a feeling. And I thought interestingly too, just connecting it in my mind, the Warriors, Walter Hill's The Warriors came out this year also.
Yep.
And he's even said, I set out to make a comic book movie. So, and I mean, obviously Superman came out the year before this, but it just feels like it was in the air. People wanted stories like that, those sort of structures or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something straightforward. I mean, I think it, again, it like, these two, unfortunate souls.
Yeah.
Just going back to what I was saying, it's like, why didn't you clear out? Like,
what were they waiting for? And also when he's like tearing out, I'm like, dude, like it's called, put it idle out of there.
Yeah. But I mean, definitely, it's like a horde of zombies, I mean, the way this whole sequence is, it reminds me of the George Romero Dead movies.
Yes.
I mean, I remember seeing this film the first time I saw it was probably 1993. And this sequence always stayed with me as really just kind of horrific.
Honestly, when you talked about doing this movie, this is the first scene I thought of.
Really?
And I had a little unpleasant feeling.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, about the movie. But I remembered I did enjoy it ultimately. And then rewatching it, I was like, yeah, no, I love it. But yeah, this is just one of those things where it's like, oh man, the true horror of this universe here.
Yeah.
These are the villains we're dealing with here. And they're not, comic booky sort of villains where they just want
That's right.
shove you to the side and take over something.
the second film begins with a voiceover montage, which incorporates found footage and various stuff just sort of set in the world, and talks about how sort of the world was, enveloped by, I think a maelstrom of decay, I think is the exact phrase. And they show this sequence in particular.
Oh, interesting.
As part of the opening montage of the Road Warrior.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the way it's staged and everything else, it very, very, very much a horror movie. And I think it, as I said earlier, I mean, this is, in terms of what's depicted on screen, this is probably the most horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And even still, I mean, it's, we don't see actual violence inflicted upon them. But what it nicely does is it sets the stakes.
Yeah. This is what these people will do. Exactly.
Right. And so it puts us in the situation where, the Hall of Justice folks, I mean, they're a bunch of goons, to be honest. I mean, they're,
Yeah.
Notwithstanding Max and the goose, the rest of them don't seem particularly good at their jobs.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the opening with the goofball with the sniper just watching a couple having sex.
Yep.
Through like a scope, which is kind of horrifying. Yeah, goobers.
I mean, that's actually the other thing that I think is kind of interesting. This is something that sort of stuck out to me on this latest rewatch. I'm like we like the goose. The goose is a good guy, right? And what I noticed for the first time, which didn't even occur to me, is on the poster, the original movie poster, it's the goose. It's not Max.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah. Probably because he's just got like a cooler helmet thing. Because I was like, Max doesn't wear that.
Yeah.
It's
like I watched the movie Valley Girl for the first time.
Okay.
It has Nicolas Cage and this woman on the poster, and the woman is not the lead character. She's someone who's in the movie for literally a minute or less.
How weird.
Is this just funny? Yeah. I don't know. They like the look, I guess.
Yeah. What's also kind of interesting is as we go through, you see the fact that Miller is still very much a newbie at this, So he's got a very clear visual style, and he said this, like the screenplay was by James McCausland, who's a journalist. And literally, it was Miller is like, well, I watched a bunch of documentaries about American movies, and it seemed like journalists become screenwriters, so I just found a journalist.
Yeah. He cited Pauline Kael's essay, Raising Cain.
Yes.
Where she talks about American scriptwriters like Herman Mankiewicz were former journalists. So he's like, well, let's find me a journalist.
Yeah.
So funny.
But he had a clear sense of what he wanted it to look like.
Yep.
And the various pieces there. But you definitely, there's parts of the film where the pacing is off.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm sort of charmed by it because I'm like, man, this is his first movie.
Yes. Like I had similar to what you're saying, I imagined someone with a bigger budget or working with a major studio, they would have been able to go back for reshoots because, this isn't clear. We can't connect this scene to that scene. So we'll just shoot something to patch it up. But this movie doesn't have that benefit.
Yes,
exactly. It can feel occasionally sort of choppy. But weirdly, it's just so well done overall that it becomes part of its charm, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
even the shot. It's great. I just want to say, I mean, this is a really talented visual filmmaker. This shot alone.
I mean, it's a preternatural talent.
Yep.
Because again, dude's an ER doc. He's like, I'm going to make a movie.
Yeah. And what I love about that is, sometimes I try to give advice to people about being a writer. And the big thing I always say is, for far too long, I was afraid to tell people I wanted to be a writer because I was just, everybody out here wants to be a writer or a director. And so I just thought I'd get a pat on the head and like, oh, you too? How cute. But then when I did, the first people I really sincerely told I wanted to be a writer was when I was working at Bob's Burgers. And then they were like, oh, well, we want to do a comic book. You're a writer. Why don't you write our comic book? They took me seriously. And so I was like, you know what? Why didn't I do that years ago? And so I love the idea of this ER doctor who's like, I want to be a director. And I'm sure some people were like, sure you do. But he's like, no, but I want to, and I'm going to do it. And then you get George Miller. So, I mean, there's really something to take away from that, I think.
And just to add on to what you said, this is something I said on our regular show. I'm like, 45 years out from the first Mad Max, the films are continuing,
Right?
and they are the product of his vision. This is the last remaining sci-fi franchise, any franchise that is one man and his creation.
Right.
And so all of those eccentricities are woven in to just what makes these movies special.
Right. Still his voice.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing too. I mean, when you look at, like you said, we haven't seen Furiosa yet, but just the trailers alone and Fury Road, just to think if he could get a glimpse into the future and be like, oh, you're going to keep telling this story. Do you want to see 2 minutes from it? And he could watch some of those sequences with the people, on the poles, and he'd probably be like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, though. I mean, getting ahead here, but you do see someone pole vaulting onto a truck in this movie.
Yes, that's right.
Which is so cool because he had that idea, but then later he was like, "Oh yeah, you think wait do you get a load of this? This is what I was always imagining."
Let's throw a few bucks at it and see what we can do with it.
Yeah, mobile pole vaulters. Yeah,
I think that's also what I really appreciate about all of these films is each of them is so visually distinct. Like you're not going to confuse Mad Max with the Road Warrior. You're not going to confuse that with Beyond Thunderdome. They each have these, and obviously Fury Road is kind of doing its own thing. That each of them gives us a window into different aspects of this this decaying future.
Mm-hmm.
I remember too the first time I watched this, the dude with the voice box after his injury. Like I always found that so unnerving too.
Yeah. I know. This guy. What's his name again? Johnny something?
Johnny the Boy.
Johnny the Boy. Even the name is unnerving.
Right.
But he's good. I think I was reading about this guy where they were saying he kind of stayed in character and it was really annoying everyone.
Yeah, it was annoying the piss out of everybody else.
Which you can kind of imagine. And so I guess when he was handcuffed to that car, they were like, all right, we're going to lunch, bye. left him once.
That's so funny. Yeah, I mean, most of the actors in the gang were just bikers.
Yeah.
And basically they were in Sydney and they were told, hey, just ride your bikes down to Melbourne.
Yeah. Get to be in a movie.
I mean, even Mel Gibson, Miller talked about how he considered casting an American just to get more eyes on the movie. And it would have been cheaper. That would have eaten up the whole budget. So they were like, well, let's just find a local kid. And they, Mel Gibson walks in and
incredible.
Worked out well.
Yep. He was a drama student, right?
Yeah. Well, both of them, Steve Bisley and Mel Gibson, both, they were just buddies.
Isn't it funny? I think about that sometimes when you have, I mean, let's even
see, really, it's Mad Goose. Look at this.
Yeah, I know. Right. But I mean, you look at like the Blair Witch Project or something, and I'm sure the kids who are in that movie probably saw that at the back of a magazine advertised, and you don't know. You're an actor. You want to be in stuff, and you have no idea that you could be appearing in a cultural phenomenon that's about to happen. And so, I mean, this could have just been some scrappy, violent Australian movie that is a cult classic in its own country and never heard from again, right? But they just happen to be in something that the whole world caught on to, and then you become Mel Gibson.
Yeah, and he got very lucky because, the year after this or 2 years after this, he was in Gallipoli with directed by Peter Weir.
Mm-hmm.
And then, he does Mad Max 2, and then he does Year of Living Dangerously, again, Peter Weir, and it's just off to the races, right?
Right.
And again, notwithstanding all the later shit, there's no doubt, and we've had this discussion. I mean, he is a presence. He is a charismatic presence, even in a film like this, where much of Act 1 and 2 is him sort of receding into the background a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, without a doubt. I mean, he's a movie star.
Yeah.
I was reading where George Miller even said, when all of that stuff went down with Gibson, he cried.
Really?
He's like, that's not the guy I know. Like, he's a nice guy. It just he's struggling with something, and he said, when I heard those tapes, I cried.
Wow.
Yeah. But going back to, this movie taking off around the world, I saw another interesting quote from George Miller where he was saying he thought the movie, this is someone's interpretation, but thought the movie wasn't taking off or was going to be a flop until around the world he saw the distribution rights being picked up, and he said, this is his quote, "It screened in Japan and they said, oh, you made a samurai film."
Mm-hmm.
Then in Scandinavia, they thought it was a modern day Viking movie. And in France, they said it's a Western on wheels. And he realized that he had tapped into universal archetypes.
Accidentally.
Yeah. But doesn't that just go to show? That's why it's universal. Someone in Australia wanted to tell a story that felt good in his gut. And it's the type of story that the world responded to.
Well, righteous vengeance.
Yeah.
Is a theme that will always have an audience. You talked about The Crow.
Yeah.
I mean that it's not that far removed from what this movie does, but above and beyond that, Gladiator, they're telling movies based on a very sturdy template.
Right.
Which is you create a villain who's so hateable that you're waiting for them to just get dispatched by the hero.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why. Maybe I think The Crow is celebrating an anniversary, so it was on my mind. But I was even thinking the people, because him and his girlfriend are, killed at the beginning, and it's all these really unhinged characters that are involved, right? That he's basically hunting down for the rest of the movie. So I think maybe that energy reminded me of that. Excuse me. I have a question.
Yes.
When he leads Johnny the boy into the ocean, what is happening?
That's a good question. I was actually I was wondering that myself as I was rewatching it.
I thought he was going to kill him because I just didn't remember this movie well enough.
My sense is, I think Toe Cutter's whole deal is, I think he's crazy like a fox, right? I think he gets off on people having no idea what he's going to do.
Sure.
So the threat is so much worse than the thing actually happening.
I thought he was going to march him into the ocean, like basically like keep walking and don't get up. Kind of a sort of death, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
There's something vaguely homoerotic. That's my read.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I can kind of see that.
Like he views Johnny the boy as like his property, if you will.
Sure.
Like there's something similar in The Road Warrior where you have the Vernon Wells character Wes, and he has his what we presume is his lover.
Mm-hmm. I need to watch that one. I probably will after this just to keep going.
Yeah. Get the full Max experience, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and they had sort of blurred in my mind. I was remembering like those cobbled together helicopter sorts of things. And so, yeah, going back to this one, I had forgotten. Oh, no, this feels pretty close to real world. It didn't have that yet.
Which is weird. That's another thing I think about, right? Like, we watch this now and we're like, this is unnervingly like modern life. And I'm like, back then, were they like, wow, the future sure looks shitty. Thank God it's not,
Yeah.
Like, are we just are we getting boiled slowly and we don't realize it,
Right. Oh, man. Well, this could be a document that someone studies later. It's like, oh, they were
quite possibly.
I thought it was kind of interesting going back to the fact that this movie was dubbed for American release. I guess that singer was the only person that was not redubbed.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but I thought that was fascinating. First of all, that it was dubbed at all, because I don't feel like they really do that anymore. When people are speaking English, but they just worry that the accents are too heavy, so they dub it
right.
Different actors. But apparently, it wasn't until 2002 when the DVD came out that
that's right.
The original Australian track was released in the U.S.
Yeah, that's right. As a matter of fact, they screened it in some theaters. Not like we do like mass releases now, but in like art theaters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this is the first time to hear the original sound mix. And I
Oh.
remember I was going to film school at the time,
Oh, wow.
and Ray Novashevsky, I was like, dude, you've never seen Mad Max? Let's go see it.
Uh-huh.
And it was this like dinky ass theater somewhere in downtown Chicago. I don't even know where. And that was I got to see it on the big screen.
Wow.
You know?
It's funny. Was that some sort of official thing? Or it reminds me with Blade Runner when they had discovered the director's cut and that wasn't an official release yet. And they would screen that, I guess, occasionally.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, 2002. So I remember the DVD coming out. So I have to think that this was something tied in with that,
Yeah, that makes sense.
right?
But I guess they also changed some words, some of the Australian slang.
Yeah, quite a few.
Yeah, which I thought was kind of...
You can see some if you go to YouTube, you can see some snippets of the American audio mix. Like the current, there's like a Shout Factory release from a couple years ago that has you can watch the dubbed version.
Mm.
And I don't have that, but it's so weird because it's just like why it's an Australian accent. Give me a break.
Yeah, no, I watched some clips on YouTube, and yeah, the Knight Rider thing. You're like, it's
yes,
just the same. It's just
right.
The same.
It's the Max is like, hey Goose, everything okay?
Yeah, right. Well, even the Knight Rider guy is so unhinged, and he's got this kind of reedy voice, and it's just like it just works. And hearing someone try to be unhinged in an ADR booth and match that whole performance that we're seeing, it just doesn't feel right.
There's some Madam Web energy there, in terms of like ADR that just doesn't work.
Yeah. By the way,
I was talking. Say again, sorry.
Sorry, I was just like, by the way, that stunt with that guy flying through the air, falling off his motorcycle. Hats off.
Yeah. Hopefully they gave him a 6-pack after that. For his payment for the day. No, but when we talk about pacing, this is a good example, right? Where you see Johnny the boy setting the sabotaging his bike, and you're like waiting for that. And then the accident happens, but that's not what does it. It's
yes. Well, and also I expected it to happen after he left the nightclub.
Right.
Like, how did he get home?
Right.
It's very funny. It was the next, but you know what? Maybe they couldn't do it at night. Maybe they couldn't light it, right? I mean, they'd have to light that street. They'd have to light that field.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny because ultimately that's not even the thing that does him in, right? Like it's something vaguely comical about the circumstance that ends up leading to Goose getting kiboshed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this literally, but going back to the airplane of it all, like it's like, or sort of like reminds me of 21 Jump Street, right? Where they keep expecting in their car chase for these flammable tankers to explode, but they don't.
Yes, yeah.
It's like the escalation. Da, 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 this thing's gonna explode, and then it doesn't, and they're like, "Oh, I really thought that truck was gonna explode." Like that almost feels like this. Like, I thought, he cut the chain on the bike. I thought it'd be the bike. It's not the bike.
Yep.
Is this the pole vault thing? No.
That's later.
That's right. That thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the locations where they shot this, I mean, that's what's sort of funny is that we're told that it's desolate and remote, but I'm like, I don't know. It seems very pastoral and scenic to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I forget. I think it's when Max and his family are leaving. Some of the locales they drive by. There's sort of like modern companies and things that you see in the background.
Yes.
Which obviously you would cover up, or you'd make it look like, well, they were there 50 years ago. If you had more money.
Right.
Light me, Johnny.
See, this is it's interesting because we had that scene earlier where the Goose was ready to just beat the shit out of Johnny, and that's why there's sort of this axe to grind. But it definitely it feels like we're lacking something in the way of lead up to why Goose is the recipient of this particular horrible death.
Yeah.
Right?
I also find it interesting that Johnny is resistant.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? I kind of weirdly want him to do it because I want to enjoy Max killing him later. But like he's sort of like, no, man, that's too far. I was like, oh, don't make me like him. You know? I mean, I don't because he's done horrifying things.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's an interesting choice, right? It weirdly makes him slightly sympathetic.
Yeah.
Or like he's under the influence of someone else.
Well, I think to the point you're making, the toe cutter, it feels like flipped. Like toe cutter should have been the last big bad.
Yes, because he's the leader, and they're all under him, and they want to be witnessed by him.
Yeah, because his death feels somewhat anticlimactic.
Sure,
you know.
Sure, yeah.
So this scene here, this is another one of those things. Man, first time I saw it, it always stayed with me. And what's remarkable, we don't see anything. We see Max's reaction.
Yeah.
I mean, we see, Goose's hand kind of comes out from under. But the reason this works is because of how Mel Gibson plays it. Look at his acting in this scene. It's terrific.
Yeah. He's always been good with that bubbling under the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a real intensity in the eyes.
But I mean, to act at this level at age 23, I mean, that's remarkable,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the little thing Miller does here when, the screen kind of warps.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells you everything you need,
Yep.
Like it becomes almost expressionistic right here. Look at that.
Yeah, I love it.
Right? That's not the goose. That's not the goose. I still like
Similarly, when that couple is assaulted, I when it goes up to that crow calling.
Yeah, right.
Just real like impressionistic. It's sort of, what did we watch recently where we were talking about that? It was cutting away to something happening to imply death. It was like an animals roaring or something. It must have been one of the Planet of the Apes movies.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
When Milo gets choked.
Yes.
See, look at that. Look at that expressionism suddenly, right? It's yep. We're at almost exactly halfway, and the whole nature of the story is shifted because really, to some extent, it was almost like a two-hander with Goose and Max, right?
Yep.
Now that said, I know we're obviously we're supposed to feel horrible for what happens to Jessie in a little bit, but I think we also have to acknowledge that her and Max are kind of terrible parents because starting with naming your kid Sprague, I think that counts as child abuse right there.
Right. Which I read, I can't back this up, but I read somewhere that that's Australian slang for child.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't back that up. But and then also there's a lot of moments that they share without their child that are very confusing. You're like, where is the child?
Yes. So I looked it up. It says a Sprague is a baby or child in British vernacular.
Oh, okay.
That said, he's only ever referred to as Sprague, which leads me to believe that is his name.
Yeah.
Which again, not a good name.
Now, this actress playing Jessie, what's her name? Joanne Samuel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She was not the original person, right? I guess the original actress was injured.
She had a Sean Young situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she was replaced only a week into shooting. Which I feel bad for her. And then you also think of a movie like this that has no budget, having to, reshoot anything must have been really painful.
Ugh. Yeah, the original actress was Rosie Bailey.
Okay.
Who I'm actually curious, like if she ended up having sort of a career.
Hope so.
I mean, the original actor who George Miller wanted to play for Mad Max, I forget his name, but he turned it down because he he didn't like how the character didn't have very much dialogue.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things where you're like, you know, now it seems like everyone who makes one of these movies with Miller is like, when I was doing it, I had no idea what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
And then I watched the thing, you know, and it's like you either trust George Miller or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's one of those sliding doors things, right? Where, like, what would that guy's career be like
Yeah.
had he taken the chance, you know?
Yeah, but it's funny you say that. I mean, right up to Anya Taylor-Joy recently was saying,
Yep.
just, you know, it was one of the most isolating experiences she ever had. You know, yeah, I guess you just have to trust the vision and allow yourself to, you know, follow direction and hope trust it'll come out for the best.
Well, you know, even from Fury Road, it's like Tom Hardy is like, I was mad at everybody, and me and Charlize Theron hated each other. Anya Taylor's Joy is like, I was in a prison of my own solitude, you know.
Yeah.
And Chris Hemsworth's like, I was in a movie, it was great, you know.
Yeah. You not love that guy.
James Healy, by the way, that was the actor who
Turned it down.
George Miller approached initially, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who I guess he's done okay. He
Good.
Kind of did some guest starring work on various American things.
I love this Fifi character here.
I was just about to bring that up.
I mean, this is it's like one thing. Okay, picture this. We're going to have a scene where Max tells his boss, you know, I don't think I want to be a cop anymore. And it's like, all right, well, let's hire this hulking man, he'll be shirtless, but be wearing a scarf and watering plants. You know, it's just so striking and memorable, you know, versus just sitting across from a desk from one another.
Yeah, well, and it helps sort of, I mean, you remember the character, right?
Yeah.
Just by virtue of that. Yeah, there was a deleted scene that the toe cutter and his people, they overtake MFP headquarters and they basically kill everybody who's there, including Fifi.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I can picture it.
Well, and that explains why we never see Fifi again.
Yeah. Oh, BP, that's what it was. I saw the BP, fuel.
Oh, the sign
in the background. I remember that standing out to me when I watched it last night. But yeah, no, just again, I mean, the Fifi and the scarf and the play, like, it just fits the aesthetic of this movie.
Yeah.
You know, it wouldn't just be in an office with someone wearing a uniform, you know, it's just,
right.
This movie has its own rules, you know?
Well, and I think to that point, right? Like I think just in a simple good guy, bad guy framing, you say, oh, we're supposed to be on the side of the MFP, the Mobile Force Patrol, Main Force Patrol. But as I said earlier, they're not particularly admirable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's sort of the interesting thing where it's like, and I think this is what Max is struggling with right here. It's like, what am I fighting to preserve?
Right.
And that's one thing. I mean, this movie very smartly works within its budgetary limitations, right? So in other words, you watch, you're never, its reach doesn't exceed its grasp, you know, to the point where you're like, oh, they have no money, that's why it looks like shit. No, they work within it. But what that also does is it sort of limits the world building. And I don't say that as a bad thing. I'm like, that allows us to sort of imagine the world beyond the frames of this movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so by extension, that lets us get to the next movie where everything's just gone to crap.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's enough left unsaid here that lets us get to there, you know?
And you can imagine, I don't remember the second one very well, but this is one area where bad things are creeping in, but maybe elsewhere it's already been taken over.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's a nuclear war between movie 1 and 2, which obviously
that explains a lot. Okay,
doesn't help. Yeah.
That reminds me, by the way, just to get personal for a second, when we were making movies, many years ago, and you showed one of them to Joe Johnston, the director. And,
Yeah.
And we were sort of playing people older than who we
Yes.
really were at the time. And that was his note was, well, it's cool that you have your friends and you want to make this thing, but you're playing people that you don't feel like they naturally are.
Yeah.
And so it was like, work with what you have and make your characters that age and work with the locations that you have. And I never forgot that. I thought that was great advice.
He gave really useful advice. It wasn't like, yeah, keep it up, kid.
Yeah. No, it was thoughtful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was relevant to what he actually watched.
Yeah.
It was nice.
How funny. Yeah. Although it's what you and I, we were probably like Mel Gibson's age in this.
Yeah, actually, yes. I bet literally. Yeah, but we were playing like grizzled old, I don't remember, like
yeah.
I forget which one it was, but yeah.
Like
older. We were playing older
stuff.
people, hitmen, yeah.
Playing older, yeah.
More seasoned type of characters.
But I mean, like, look at what Max is wearing here, right?
Yes.
I mean, you're like, that's Mad Max?
Yeah. Like he looks like my dad here.
Yeah. See, I was talking about pacing and stuff like this too, right? You would think that the encounter Jesse has here is what directly leads to what eventually happens.
100%.
Right? And it's weird. It's an interesting creative choice to just be like, no, this is an episode, and it's almost unrelated to what happens later.
Yeah, and it made me wonder why she would wander off by herself.
Yes.
Again. It feels like they should stick together. I mean, I guess that's any horror movie, right? Why don't they stick together? But
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I expected this to be the moment because this movie isn't. I don't know it by heart, but it's not. It's not. This is just an encounter she has. But it's really creepy. I mean, these guys are just. I mean, even that. I mean, having the toe cutter guy just, rolling around like a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But he's such a scary figure. It's weird. And then when they start doing these animal noises.
Yep.
Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I think it points to how the collapse of civil society, which is never that far outside the realm of possibility, just in our everyday life, right? But you see how it's led to this situation where these people can act with utter impunity.
Mm-hmm.
Not merely in terms of how they treat people, but just their behavior, which is, as you said, animalistic and kind of just outside the norms of what would be considered appropriate and just regular everyday interactions, right?
Yeah.
Because there are no consequences.
Yep.
Because the only consequences is the MFP, which is kind of a joke.
Right. I love by the way that she does that with the ice cream cone.
Mm-hmm.
She even threw me off for a minute, the way she was smiling. And then
right.
knees him in the balls. I was like, oh, that's so good. She's great.
It's like, okay, get in. Let's go. Gotta go now.
And he's like, but the tire. She's like, no, get in the effing car. Yeah. Now this guy, he's not in on it, right? But he does lead the bad guys to them. Like he's not.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But definitely, like, you can see a scenario where this all was tightened up. So that because essentially it's like we have this little thing here, and then it's another, like, oh, things are fine and everything's good, and then, you know what I mean? Before the actual murder happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just again, I think some of Miller's inexperience shines through.
Yeah, and even with the script itself.
Right.
Where oh shoot, what was his name? I forgot, the journalist. McCausland?
Oh, McCausland, yeah.
And he even said, he's like, I didn't know how to write a script. I just went to a bunch of movies and tried to sort of pattern it off of things that I watched. And you can see where it's like, yeah, this very much resembles a Western, but there's just some missteps that any screenwriter could make in their earlier stuff.
Right.
That you kind of learn from.
But I mean, in terms of like a visual style and personality. I mean, very much. I see. I just revisited the first Dirty Harry recently, and I see a lot of those same stylistic ticks.
Mm-hmm.
And so you clearly Miller was coming at it as somebody who had just sort of inhaled films of that era.
Totally. Sometimes I do watch older films from the 60s or 70s, and they are oddly paced or a little enigmatic, and you think,
Right.
oh, is that just how it was? I mean, did we just sort of learn from those mistakes and get a little sharper? But it's funny because then you look at movies from, Wizard of Oz or It's a Wonderful
Right.
Life from the 30s and 40s. You're like, no, those are pretty sharp.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting.
Well, I mean, what you started to see in the late 60s, with, kind of the auteur movement came in, and, movies like Easy Rider,
Sure.
switching up the expanding the boundaries of what films could be.
And
right?
a little Damn the Man. I mean, there's definitely
absolutely.
the hero's journey and those sorts of guidelines and that most movies tend to follow, but there's a lot of people that are like, screw that. And so
Right.
some people mess with that formula, like you get Tarantino and Pulp Fiction, and you think, wow, okay, bravo, and then other people mess with it, and it just doesn't sit quite right.
And I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, I think we have to look at this film contextualized with what it led to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Were it not for the other films, would this be, a part of the conversation the way it is? I don't know, right? Because I think to the point that you're making, ultimately the Mad Max franchise became about the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
So this one pushes back against a lot of those tropes, but certainly the second one, definitely the third one, very traditional. I mean, the third one is like as mainstream as it gets. Probably out of any of them, it's the most mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's almost like you can expand those boundaries, but there is a sort of the gravitational pull of back to formulas that are comfortable to people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, totally. It's funny you say that. I don't know this. It's more made up sign language.
It's just made up.
And also, where are you going? Don't leave.
Where is your child?
I know. Actually, yeah, that's a something that happens later where she realizes that her child isn't with her, and I don't know. I'm not a mother, but I just feels a little out of character for a mother.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I go to Target with my kids, and if they're one aisle over from me, I get antsy.
Right. Yeah, you can almost imagine a version 2 where she takes the child to the beach, but I'm sure there must have been some sort of limits with the child actor.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
I'm assuming. I love that shot, by the way. That's a horror movie shot right there, where she's
the
walking
hand
through the trees. Yeah, and then the camera kind of goes over, and you see a hand suddenly grip a tree.
Yeah, another bit of false tension, right?
That's true. This is an interesting character, isn't it?
Yeah.
The woman's son.
Yes.
Yeah. But I'd read somewhere too that George Miller set out to make a movie that he called it a silent movie with sound.
Right. Yeah. He was like, oh, they should be able to watch it in Japan or wherever and not need to read the subtitles.
And I think he succeeded. I mean, it's just even those motorcycles pulling up. It's just very ominous, and it's very serene where she is, but then you don't even see their faces. You just see motorcycles pulling up toward camera and stopping, and you go, uh-oh.
Yeah.
It is a very visually dynamic movie.
See, I think as a point of comparison with the later films, there's something fantastical about the Road Warrior in Thunderdome, where you sort of content yourself with like, oh, well, it's fantasy. It's like another world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It might as well be a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Sure.
Whereas I think what this film, partly what makes it work, what makes it eerie, is it it's very relatable visually. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It
um,
feels like our world. And some of
yeah,
the violence too, again, going back to that poor couple, it
yeah,
feels like real world violence
yeah.
versus, something we've talked about before is the John Wick movies, where I think in the
Hmm.
first movie, watching him shoot a bunch of people, it's fun, but it also feels like a little too close to reality
Mm-hmm.
in a way because we hear about
Mm-hmm.
shooting so often. But what that series wisely did was they made the world increasingly ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
with each film. So now it just becomes it's like a musical with guns.
Huh.
So you don't really have to think about the implications of the violence. It doesn't feel too real world
Yeah. Well, I
for
mean,
it to be disturbing.
I think the Max films followed a similar trajectory.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what you made me think of that.
Hmm.
I think it helps.
I another trilogy that comes to mind is Evil Dead.
Yeah.
Which I'm not an expert on those films, but
Same.
it's definitely the same thing where the first one is just Sam Raimi and his buddies just like run and
Right.
gun, right?
Right.
And then by the time you get to the third one, that's the big studio backed one, and
Yeah.
a very similar arc.
You know, that real quick, we'll talk about this guy. But I was wondering what I was saying at the very, very beginning was I wonder how far George Miller was imagining the reality of this universe, even just with this first one. Was the second one him going, "Oh, finally, I can do the thing I had in my head all along," or did this? We'll do the thing within our limitation, which means we have to make it kind of like this.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's kind of interesting. Let's run with that. Let's make it even bigger. In fact, I'm kind of curious which it was.
I think that it didn't occur to him the larger mythical possibilities afforded this character until he started to see the reaction from
Mhm.
people across the globe.
Interesting.
Because again, you watch this film completely separate from the context of those other two, and you say, well, I mean, it's well made, it's interesting, there's a compelling story, but you're not like, oh, Max Rockatansky is going to become this iconic
Mm.
warrior of the wasteland. You know what I mean? It just based on this alone. I mean, there you can get there,
Hmm.
but I can't imagine George Miller thought that far ahead. I'm sure he was just like, am I going to make back my 350 grand?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I was reading about how in order to raise the money, he was going on emergency medical calls.
Wow.
you know,
Don't you love stories like that? Or
I'm
Kevin
like
Smith?
Kevin Smith. I was going to say, yeah, exactly. When it
Yeah.
pays off,
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? I
because
mean,
how many people has it not paid off for?
yeah. I mean, you think about how many people are out there with credit card debt, and you can be inspired by those stories, but definitely want to work with
I mean, didn't Kevin Smith say that? Like, for God's sake, don't do what I did.
it. Right.
Which is,
Yeah,
he
probably.
maxed out his credit cards.
Yeah. I feel like I can't remember, but this shot was unnerving me because that big window behind her.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, something's going to pop up. Oh, that's what it is. And then she remembers the kid here. Yeah.
Yeah, which again, Jesse,
Yeah, I know. I know. I thought I read somewhere also that this house was abandoned. And so Miller used his own furniture to furnish it to make it look lived in.
How funny.
I love that. That's the stuff I love, That's
the cool thing. I mean, I certainly, I'm thinking back to when I saw this when I was in film school, and it was that sense of like, this is somewhat achievable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even that's like 2002, where you still had to get a hold of a Bolex or whatever,
Man.
like, I mean, now you could grab your iPhone and shoot something that looks good,
Yeah, at 24 frames per second.
Amazing.
And I mean, I look at some of the stuff that we made that actually did pretty well. It performed on YouTube, but it was shot, it looked like video.
Yep.
And you think, if only I had had the cameras that came about 2 or 3 years later, let alone the phones we have in our cameras.
Doesn't it feel like we were like just slightly out of time, like in the,
Yep. Yeah.
Now there is a popular fan theory that says the toe cutter is Immortan Joe, And I'm convinced that's a theory advanced by people who did not actually watch this movie.
Right.
Because it is a stupid fan theory. Now George Miller, I mean, it is, right?
I just love that because it's stupid.
George Miller, throughout the films, has used actors multiple times in different roles.
Oh, okay.
So that's why Hugh Keys-Byrne is in this one, and then he's in Fury Road. This scene right here, I think that's the most emotional the toe cutter gets.
Yeah.
But in the second and third film, he has Bruce Spence playing two different characters who seem very similar. The gyro captain.
I wonder what's the purpose of that woman's son.
That is a great question.
Why include him?
Yeah. Other than the momentary fear.
Yes.
Which again, man, to me, it's like this movie is just this side of satirical in terms of sort of lampooning horror movie tropes and things like that.
Sure. Yeah.
This too. I mean, I'm just like, God, this poor lady, she's in for it.
I know. But yeah, I was just thinking, I do kind of like this idea. This, like this is good. We're getting a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
Just for it to all, of course, fall apart. But this is good ideas. Like lock them up. Then you think, well, now what?
Yeah.
It looks like they're getting away. I think we're okay, right? Yeah, but I always think that too in horror movies or movies like this, where you think of the poor people who are getting involved with our characters who are doomed.
Yes.
They're just trying to be helpful.
I mean, I drew the comparison to Romero zombie movies. I mean, this is like a zombie horde.
Mm-hmm. They're just going to keep coming.
Yeah.
Yep. But something that popped out at me, it's very small. There's a lot of other bigger shots, but just the stylish way that he shoots them, almost like horses, leaping over the rear ends and hopping on and then going off. You know what I mean? Where he does that with the motorcycles and the way that it's cut so well. I'm like, yeah, no, you watch this movie and you hear this is a first time director and you go, oh, sign this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
This guy's got it.
No, absolutely. And what's great here, coming up here, we don't see anything.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, just seeing the
shoe,
it's
almost worse.
Yeah,
a child's shoe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even when Max, the way his discovery is staged, where you see him, he's in the distance. I mean, it's so effective. And that's what I mean. Yeah, as you said, it's rated R. I think it's rightly rated R, because it makes you feel, really unsettled. But yet, look at how you can deploy the language of film in a way where you don't have to be gratuitous about it. I didn't need to see Jesse or the kid.
Right.
And again, man, look at his face.
I know. He's trying to get away from it.
See, look at that. The camera stops.
Yep.
That's terrific. Look at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the nature of this film is such that without knowing anything else, you're like, well, it's not going to end well for this happy family.
Yeah.
And so to some extent, the entire film is sort of a winding down to the inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that, that's what makes it that much sadder when it eventually happens.
Yeah. So I guess it is a 70s movie.
Yeah, that's right.
You wonder about all this doctor speak here. This is coming from his, inspiration. From,
I mean, from his own life.
Seen. Yeah.
They lost the kid DOA. I love that. Tell him she's going to be all right. Tell him not to worry. And he's heard everything they've said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like renal failure and this and that and the other thing,
Yep. Do you think he ever said, "I'm a doctor, not a fortune teller"?
That was left on the cutting room floor.
No, that's in there. I just mean, did he ever hear it in real life? Like, did that come from, "I'm a doctor, not a fortune teller"? One of them
I think that I was actually thinking about what you see as an ER doc.
Oh, yeah, I know.
How, like out of all the different, right? If you're a thoracic surgeon or a neurologist or whatever, I mean, there's like ups and downs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of percentages, the day-to-day trauma that you witness in the emergency room, what does that do to your soul?
I actually thought about that. It's funny you say that. Literally during that scene where they're like, well, we lost the kid. And I thought, I mean, do you just have to become a robot? Because then it's like, okay, what now? Like, yes, we lost him and now we have to worry about her. You just have to almost shut it off or you just be crushed by it all, I would imagine.
Jeez.
I don't know. Or at least while you're at work, you have to turn it off to some degree.
That's hard, man. I mean, it's
job.
like, yeah, I don't know.
But that was a real sort of superhero moment there, right? I mean, where he's, well, I got to do what I got to do. And then he opens the chest and rips off the blanket and then reveals his outfit. Yeah. They really lucked out with the weather too, by the way, with when it showed him holding the mask and he's, if you want to say, going mad a little bit. And you got those storm clouds gathering behind him and it's like, oh.
So, sometimes nature is working in your favor.
Yeah, it's brewing. It's brewing.
So all the other MFP officers, except maybe Goose, everyone had vinyl for their uniforms. Mel was the only one with actual leather.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. For a budget. Yeah, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is as the series progresses, definitely in the next one, you see he's wearing the same uniform, but it's more torn up and,
sure,
weathered and whatnot. And so there is a natural progression. It's meant to be, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, because the next one came out 3 years later, and it's meant to be set 3 years later also. So it's a real world reflection. But it's weird because Max looks substantially older. Even though he would be like 26 or something, And so I sent George Miller a note. I was like, you should play your age. Don't try to play.
Yeah.
He's like, who is this? Stop writing to me.
So here we go. This is right?
This is what you were talking about.
Which is just very cool. It's just a cool stunt to begin with. The pole vaulting on top.
Well, and the fact that you just have guys doing it and you're just kind of grabbing the shot where you can. Again, this is like total film school antics where you don't think about the fact that you might die.
I know.
Oh, just get on the hood of the car and we'll grab the shot.
Yep.
Oh, just hang on to the car while it swerves and tries to shake you off. Oh, okay.
I remember in one of your movies, I got hit by a car.
Yes, that's right.
And I literally did. I mean, it was going very, very slowly, but it was like, it's like, well, and it was your car. So you're like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about denting it. I was like, all right. So I just like leaped onto this hood and like, and rolled off.
Yeah. Did you get it? Like, let's get one more for safety. Okay.
I don't believe it, Brian. Make me believe it. Yeah,
I could see the stars circling your head, the cartoon birds,
That's funny. I read somewhere that the cinematographer was just on a motorcycle going 100 miles an hour. Just crazy.
I mean, it's bananas. But look at that. The shots. Because some of these cars, I don't know about Max's Interceptor, but like the MFP cars, they couldn't go faster than like 60.
Oh, interesting. I mean, some of these shots are sped up. Clearly.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And which is something he still does, by the way. See, look at this. This guy right here. Watch this. The guy with the red helmet who on the, I think we're gonna, right here. Watch this. Bam, right there.
Oh yeah. He's slid off of his motorcycle and the motorcycle's tumbling behind him and then knocks him in the head.
The tire, and he just walked up and he just walked it off. And then again, they gave him a 6-pack and he left.
It's crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. But, well, it looks amazing. I wouldn't recommend it, but
Pain is temporary, film is forever.
That's right. That's what the mantra on Back to the Future was, apparently. And when you see Michael J. Fox and knocking his skull against the pavement of that street, and that kills me every time I see that.
The thing of it is, right, because we're sitting here and we're kind of like in awe of some of the stuff that some of the shots they pulled off, right? And you realize like the flip side is the safety restrictions are there for a reason.
Yes, sure.
Right? Because, a couple of years after this, George Miller was one of the filmmakers who was a part of the Twilight Zone movie. Right?
Right.
Which, his segment, which was a remake of Nightmare at what was the Nightmare at 20,000 feet?
20,000 feet or something, yeah.
Which I think I've said this before. The original, the one with William Shatner from the old TV series, Richard Donner directed that.
Right.
And then George Miller did the remake. So two of my favorite directors.
Oh, how funny.
But, the John Landis segment, which was, obviously people died, but the more you learn about how irresponsible they were, it's honestly infuriating.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, that's the thing, sometimes it's like there's this mentality of like, oh, fortune favors the foolish. Just get the shot. It's like, yeah, but there's a cost attached,
I had a thought watching The Fall Guy recently. I saw it again because my wife hadn't seen it yet. And there's some things that you think would be practical because they've touted that movie as a celebration of stuntmen, but you see they've used modern sort of techniques or technology to pull off the stunt. And part of me thought, oh, well, in a movie to celebrate stuntmen, you think they would want the stuntmen to actually go out and do some of those certain things. But then I thought, no. Like, it's not worth someone's life.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at in 2024. And that's good. That's a good thing. We do the things that they can do that look amazing, but we also, above anything else, we protect.
Right. By the way, sorry, while we're talking Fall Guy, this is something I meant to say when we were talking about the movie. Do you think that film is at least partly an FU to Tom Cruise?
Yeah, we didn't really get into that, did we?
Right.
Federica and I were talking about that. The name Tom comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And Tom
Ryder,
Cruise is referenced.
Tom Ryder, Tom Cruise.
Yeah. And you have, the Tom Cruise-esque character being quoted as saying, I do all my own stunts.
Yep.
Yeah, which I buy into with Tom Cruise, but maybe that isn't quite accurate.
Yeah, apparently a lot of stuntmen have some thoughts about that.
Yeah.
So here begins the Mel Gibson playing through pain scene.
Yeah.
That's in like every Mel movie. Now this shot right here, coming up here where you see him dragging his leg. First of all, look how Miller stages this. But you have the shot from the rear where he's dragging his leg behind him. Where is it? There goes Johnny. Bye, Johnny.
You can see the meat where he's been shot too.
Yeah. Oh, it's and he's got like a leg brace in the later films too, which I love that's
that's cool. I love that.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk over it. I feel like it's going to happen.
I know. Did we just miss the shot or something? Oh, there it is right here.
Yeah.
So James Cameron, literally, he looked at that shot and he's like, that's such a badass shot that he used that in The Terminator in the first film when the Terminator, the endoskeleton is dragging its foot behind him.
I didn't even know you're going to say that, but while I was waiting for it, and the shot too, really low, looking up at him, moving forward, limping forward, I was like, oh, this reminds me of The Terminator. Well, there it is. There it is. It looks great. And I love that. I mean, obviously he kept the continuity for the further films, but I love in this one too, he never loses the limp. A lot of times in movies, someone gets shot and then they just forget about the injury and become the superhero again. But that's
a good point.
He's injured and he plays that out through the rest of this movie. It slows him down. I like that.
Yeah. I
good
do
ruse,
love,
by the way, the guy out there in the field.
Say again, sorry?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying good ruse, having the guy out in the field
oh, yeah.
so they could pull one over on him. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, you were talking about continuity, and I was thinking, that's also very interesting to me, is that Miller made an effort to maintain certain aspects of continuity. But if you ask him, like, what's the canon, what goes where, he's like, whatever, man.
Really?
And I love that. Right?
Yeah.
Where it's like he said this like about Fury Road. He's like, it takes place after Thunderdome, I guess.
I love that. Yeah.
And that's kind of the cool thing because the Mad Max, certainly the latter films, what you really get a sense of is that these are stories. Okay, but look at that right
the
there.
eyes.
Look at the eyes popping out, but look at the front of the truck. You see that?
Yes.
That's not the front of the truck. They just put like a metal thing there and just put deco on it to look like the front of the truck because the actual owner was like, I don't want you effing up my truck.
Can you imagine? I mean, yeah, if James Cameron in the year, 2000 says, "Hey, I want to use your truck," you go, "Well, yeah, all right, it's gonna be in this big movie, right?" But like these guys, you're like, "Oh, I'm a doctor and I'm trying to make a movie." We have no money. You're like, "Yeah, put a shield on my truck."
Yeah, exactly. So Toe Cutter, again, it feels anticlimactic to me.
It's a cool death. But,
Yeah.
I mean, and the eyes are really fascinating and kind of gross, but we don't even really see his face.
Yes.
You almost want to see a realization of, oh man, he got me.
Like I feel like you should have inverted. That should have been Johnny the Boy, and then this final piece here, that's the Toe Cutter.
Yeah, because there's a real sadistic Saw-like sort of ultimatum he gives him at the end. That's his ultimate death, and you feel like, yeah, you want to give that to the guy who's the leader, who's ordering all these people to go out and do horrible things.
Yeah, exactly.
I get that.
But what I was saying earlier, in terms of the films, if it's almost like these are stories that are being told from far into the future of this road warrior,
Mm-hmm.
and so they don't all necessarily line up because they're like recollections. When a man becomes a myth,
right?
Like because certainly the first sequel, it's told via narration. It's the little boy as an old man telling the story. And I watched it with Hamza, and I was like, if you think about it, it's actually a hopeful story.
Yeah.
In the context of it, he's an old man, and he's like, I went on, I became the chief of the great tribe. Like we know, eventually humanity comes back.
Right.
Right. Now you mentioned Saw. It's worth saying James Wan and Lee Whannell, they specifically credit this scene for sparking the Saw series.
Oh, you're kidding me. I didn't know that.
That is true.
I mean, that 100% makes sense. I mean, it's about, for me, it was the handcuff and the hacksaw. I was like, well, and it's the ultimatum.
That's right.
You could try to cut through the steel. That'll take 10 minutes. You could cut through your foot. That'll take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Either way, this car is going to blow up. Good luck.
Jeez. Yeah, I think as an indicator of how far Max has fallen, I suppose, it's effective. I think as a critique, I wish we'd gotten a better sense of his unwillingness to be this type of person in the first half of the film.
Yeah, maybe with those goofballs he's working with, they color outside of the lines in a way that he's like, no, man, we're the last line of respectability and, honor in this crazy world. I could see that. And
certainly knowing that there was a deleted scene where the MFP gets overtaken by these guys, I almost wish they would have left that in.
Yeah. Me too. It would just only contribute to what he's willing to do here.
But I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's all with benefit of hindsight, knowing the place of this film in the overall franchise. On its own, I think it works for what it is, which is it's a pretty straightforward 70s style revenge thriller. And really, when you think about it, other than the fact that it says, a few years in the future, it doesn't even feel like a sci-fi movie.
No. Which I had kind of forgotten. I was saying, I was expecting a little bit more of the weird vernacular that they have, where society is even further away from what we know, and sort of the weird cobbled together cars. But yeah, this is not quite there yet. Yeah, not quite sci-fi.
Yeah, and by the time we get to the next one, certainly the third one, like I said, there's something almost sexy that comes in where it's like a comic convention cosplay type,
Sure.
I want to dress up like, the Humongous or whatever. And that to me is what I like about these films is that you see this progression. It's like, when we were talking about Planet of the Apes earlier, the newer films. That's what I found interesting is you watch Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes and you're like, this started with a world that looks just like ours, James Franco and whatever. And to see that progression, I love that the Mad Max films have done that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And from one movie to the next, you just see sort of something further and further from something that resembles what's familiar to us.
Right.
Man, I'll tell you that, I've seen this movie a bunch of times, but I'm always captured by the character that George Miller imbued it with.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed rewatching this. I'd only seen it once, maybe twice, maybe, I don't remember, but there's just something, maybe because we love film so much and filmmaking, but there's just something invigorating about watching someone with limited means who is bursting with talent. There's just something sort of attainable about it, invigorating about it, and this movie is just filled with all of that.
Yeah, and Miller and Spielberg are somewhat contemporaries, and yet like Spielberg, it's like he was born for this. Like it was like that. It was his destiny. He
was fully formed.
Yes, yeah. Right. Yeah. And I love the fact that George Miller is like, hey, I want to try this.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch this, and you're like, he just had it, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like some people just do. Some people just got it.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about James Cameron. Look at filmmakers from that era, right? Miller, Spielberg, Cameron, Ridley Scott, right? These are people who all sit at the same table.
Yeah.
And you see why. Yeah. I told you recently, I watched the pilot episode of Columbo, which Steven Spielberg directed.
And
you're like, holy shit.
Really?
I mean, this guy, again, he was like early 20s, man. He's like end of Fableman's Steven Spielberg.
Right. And that's
like,
crazy.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I have to watch that.
Yeah, you really should. Not the there was like a one-off movie in 1968. There was like the pilot episode of the series, which wasn't even a series. It was a series of like movies.
Okay.
But it was like 1971. Spielberg did that.
Okay. But you were talking about all these people sitting at the table together, and it's interesting that they're still titans.
Yeah.
All these years later, I mean, they are still going at it and considered titans.
Very true. And I realize as I say this, I'm talking about Mad Max being kind of the last filmmaker driven franchise. Of course, there's Avatar. Everyone forgets Avatar.
Sure. Yes. Even as it literally sits at the top of the mountain, we still forget to cite Avatar.
So we got two left, but no. I hope this is the beginning of what will be a periodic walk through the remainder of the Mad Max franchise.
Absolutely, I can't wait.
Right, I think that's something I'm looking forward to. I'm certainly looking forward to coming back in short order and talking about Furiosa.
Same, yeah, I'm very excited.
That's a conversation that's coming up in a couple days. But hey, if you have any thoughts for us about our commentary on Mad Max, you can email us at moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com. You can also hit like on our Facebook page, facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast, and message us there. Please let us know what you're thinking. And if you wouldn't mind, go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review, leave a star rating. Every little bit helps, and we would appreciate that so very much. With that, on behalf of my partner, Brian Hall, my name is Aki Hassan. This has been our commentary track for Mad Max. Catch you next time. Thanks, folks.